Hey, welcome to Transform Your Workplace. I'm your host, Brandon Laws, and I've got Xenium returning guest, Paige Tamlyn. Yeah, Paige. We are going to talk about Glassdoor's annual report they call the 50 HR and recruiting stats for 2019. I think I did one with Lacey last year, if I remember right, on the 2018 report.
Wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah, so we're going to do the 2019 report, and they have a lot of, there's a lot of similar stats that they had last year, but there's a lot of different ones, and I want to cover a lot of that stuff.
Yeah.
I'm going to kick it off with a couple stats that I thought were interesting, and then I want you to dive into, because I know you highlighted a bunch of stuff that I probably can't speak to as well. So they have a section called Inside the Mind of Job Seekers, and they said that the top two pieces of information workers and job seekers look for when researching a company are salaries and benefits. They had, it must have been whatever survey population they had, 67% said salaries, 63% said benefits. So those are the top two reasons. Is that surprising to you?
No, because it is
anticlimactic. No.
Sorry, that's it. It is and it isn't, because I always tell my clients, like, when you're posting jobs, that's what people want to know. Is it like, at least are they in the ballpark of what your salary range is and what your benefits are? Because in the market that we're in now, people are not going to jump from one job to another
without
for
knowing,
lesser salary and lesser benefits. Like, it needs to at least be equivalent, if not better. So if you're not posting that stuff out, you're kind of like wasting your time, you're wasting their time. So it's like,
but what's interesting is I see a lot of job postings out there, whether it's on LinkedIn or Glassdoor or other job sites, and they don't have those things listed.
Yeah.
You almost have to go either deep into the application process, or they don't even disclose it probably till the interview.
Yeah.
I don't know this firsthand because I haven't interviewed in like 10 years. So.
Right. You've been here for a bit.
A million years. Lifer.
Yeah. I haven't either. I've been here for almost 6 years, so I'm pretty out of touch as well. But my clients are dealing with this. And it's, like I said, the market is so interesting right now that I feel like the less information that you put out in front of job candidates, the less likely they are to like want to proceed with even exploring that at all, because it's just, it's not going to work out with what they're in line with and what they're looking for. So otherwise agree. They're like in interviews, and then you're like, well, here's the salary. And they're like, wow, that's 10 grand less than I make now. I'm not interested anymore.
And without knowing that information, it kind of feels like bait and switch if you get later on in the process and that information is not disclosed whatsoever.
Yeah.
I'd be pretty frustrated as a candidate. So I get why, if their basic needs are not going to be met with salary and benefits.
Yeah.
And you don't disclose that early on, then
I feel like the benefits piece, like as important as that is for people, there's a little bit of give and take with that, right? Like switching to a different carrier might not be a huge issue. If your 401k match is somewhat equivalent, like that's stuff that you can deal with. But the salary piece, like people are very, very sensitive to the amount of money that they make. And if you are messing with that, that's less likely that they're going to jump ship from one place to another.
What do you think about like posting ranges or even just vague benefits, like a list of stuff that
if you're in a really competitive space and you don't want your competitors knowing like what you're offering because you're trying to keep that competitive edge, like I totally get not like releasing 100% of what everything you're offering, but I think at least a range for your salary is helpful, so they can at least say, okay, I'm right in the middle of that. That's great. And there's some room for me to grow. Or I'm right at the top of that. Is that really something that I want to pursue, knowing that there's no real room for growth and improvement for that? So I think the range is helpful, at least some idea, just a bulleted list of like all the benefits you offer.
Yeah, I like that.
It's not going to take you more than a couple minutes to put in your job posting. I feel like it would make a huge impact.
Yeah. So similarly, on this section of Inside the Mind of Job Seekers, they had the factors that contribute to workers and job seekers' perception of long-term potential. And they had like 4 different stats here. So they said 44% said transparency about pay and benefits. 39% said information about growth opportunities. 37% said knowledge of company promoting from within. 35% positive sentiments in employee reviews. So these are pretty interesting stats here. These are public-facing data points or language that people would look for in determining whether it's a long-term fit or potential. What do you think about any of these? Anything stick out to you?
The positive sentiments and employee reviews is interesting because it's one thing for your managers and stuff to be posting reviews about your company on Glassdoor. It's a whole nother thing to see current employees giving reviews or, departing employees giving reviews. I think that that's really telling. And not to say that if your company's gone through a period of growth or something, not to say that things don't change, but I think that's really interesting. I think it's also interesting the fact about the information about growth opportunities, that 39%.
Yeah.
Succession planning and career pathing are all things that millennials and the next gen are really looking for.
100% agree. In fact, when I interviewed the authors of Generation Z, the Century in the Making, they had described how the Gen Zers, they're looking for growth opportunities. And they all learn so differently too. Yeah. So I think the more clear employers can be about that early on in the process of recruiting and hiring, I think the more likely you're going to get that. Right. It depends on what skill set you're looking for, obviously. But if you're going for that generation where it's a newer technical position or something like that, then I think being very clear about growth opportunities is important. The point about the employee reviews is funny because I look at it, my vantage point as a marketer, right? Like there's a way to manipulate using certain language. So what I would encourage people to look for there, or, for employers who are listening to this, it's got to be real. And I would look for storytelling, like very specifics, because if it's just a bunch of really positive reviews that are really generic, again, you can manipulate that all day long. Like as a marketer, you can have language all day about how awesome your company is, but if you don't have true storytelling from a variety of people, it's easy to look past that. Yeah. I would actually look for a mixture of bad reviews too. Like
I always read the bad reviews, right? Like, and that's where the truth is, right? Is always in the bad stuff.
Not always.
So I feel like most often.
If you have a balance, because people could vent about their situation.
You're always going to have the one really super disgruntled employee that leaves, but you also have people that leave for good reasons, right? Like, they grew me and so I left into a new position. And so I think that there's a lot of truth to people departing from positive or neutral or negative.
Yeah. Okay, what do you got? I know you have some stats that you want to talk about, so skip around to whatever you want to go to.
Yeah, I wanted to talk about so they had another section. It was called the candidate experience, and it was all kind of talking about stats of what people are looking for when they're interviewing with you and recruiting from your company. So I thought it was interesting. They said aspects on the job application process that job seekers or workers find most important to a positive experience were clear and regular communication, 58%, clear expectations, 53%, and feedback regarding rejection, 51%. And I can tell you, like, more, and I've been in a recruiting role, and that hardest part is like rejecting people because it feels so personal.
Okay, so you think about it from that vantage point. Like, are you responding to them? Are you saying like, hey, we went in a different direction, or like, thanks for your application? Like if it's early on in the process,
it depends on how your process works. And if you have like an applicant tracking system, it's probably going to respond to everybody's resumes that come in. And if they weren't selected for interview, it's going to auto respond to them. But I always tell my clients, if you have interviewed with them, they deserve like an actual phone call, not an email, not a letter. Like they deserve a phone call that says, hey, we're going in a different direction. We found somebody that has a skill set or that, aligns with our culture better. But it feels really hard because it feels like you're personally rejecting this person. Like you weren't good enough. And it's true. Yeah. And it's not that that's what it is, but I feel like the more that you let your applicants just kind of like go into their own head about like why they were rejecting you, you're going to make assumptions.
Or what if you don't hear anything at all? I think that's
worst.
Even worse. And it's funny. I was scrolling through Twitter the other day, like I think it was over the weekend. And I follow a lot of HR people, rightly so, like looking for ideas and content. And
he just likes HR people. It's okay. You can just tell us.
But it was funny how so many people were describing how shitty the candidate experience is, where, people won't even hear back from the employer at all about like what the status of their application is.
Yeah.
We're in a day and age now where there's automated tools where you can easily kick out a response. Like if you selected somebody else to move along in the process and others are left behind, well, I would think a status change would allow an email to be kicked out to say, hey, sorry you didn't meet our requirements. We went in a different direction. Right. Thank you so much for applying.
Yeah.
It seems
it's not that hard.
So easy to do that.
And I think that if you have, like I said, an ATS system set up, it's probably going to do those things for you. But it's really like that in-person interview when you've made a connection with that person and you're going a different direction. It's not to say that there's anything wrong with that. Like that's what's best for your company. And eventually the applicant will understand that. But like you said, like hearing nothing is just like the worst. Like then they've put themselves out there. It's like going on a date, right? And then not hearing back from somebody. They're like, what was wrong with me? Like, why wasn't I?
You don't know what that's like,
I don't know what that's like at all. I'm like one of the only single people here at
The last time I dated was like a million years ago, like 15 years ago, I think. So
I can tell you from the dating perspective, right? Like, I always let people know if it's not going to work out. And I would hope that an employer that I was interviewing would do the same thing, right? It's just common courtesy. So
okay, so question on that, not necessarily the dating part, but like on just rejection in general, like how specific do you get? Like, for example, let's say I had 3 candidates who all made it 2 interviews in, maybe 3 interviews in, and I'm about to make my decision.
Please don't make them do more than 3 interviews.
Okay, so let's say 2 interviews and I'm making the decision now. 1 interview and I made my decision. I'm going with 1 candidate and 2 are not going to get it.
Sure.
How specific do you get with them if they ask about why you didn't go with them? Yeah.
And it depends on how open you've been with them through the interview process. So I kind of tell my clients like, hey, we're interviewing a couple people this week. So we're, expect to hear back from us next week. Like keep them up to date on what is going on and also kind of let them know like there's other people that need to be interviewed.
Yeah.
And then at that point, you can just say, we were looking for somebody with this particular skill set, this particular quality. Especially
so not like you can't say like, oh, we didn't choose you because like
you had a bad attitude,
protected class or something like you're pregnant or you're
no, please don't do that.
Or, so don't do that.
No, I think it's based on skill set, and sometimes it truly is based especially if you do like team interviews, especially if it's a really small team, and then you want the whole team to interview with them, like. The team just, kind of like bonded and had a better, kind of like working chemistry with somebody else. And I think it's nothing that's against them. It just like, and they probably felt it too,
it's kind of hard
right?
to be specific about that. It's like, it's just a feeling.
It's a feeling. And sometimes that is how it is, right? Like not often in this day and age are there people that have such a vast different skill set. Yeah. Especially if you're in a particularly, refined industry. Yep. So a lot of them all have the same credentials, the same experience, the same education level. So sometimes it is feeling.
Okay, they have a section on diversity, inclusion, and belonging. I know you had some thoughts about some of these stats. Go for it.
I thought it was really interesting. This one is like in bold. So obviously they were really interested by this as well. So it's 40% of workers across generations and genders feel socially excluded or ignored at work.
Wow.
40%. That is just like mind-boggling to me.
I guess when you add 2 of those, like, so the generations and then genders, when you add those 2, maybe that's why it's so high, but it's still concerning. And so, like, as an employer, looking at the stat, I would think, or especially if you're managing a team, it's like, how do we build inclusivity? Is that a word?
Yeah.
Whatever.
You got it.
I got it. Okay. English is hard.
so hard. It's really early, guys.
Why am I a podcaster? So like building inclusivity between the teams or the organization across gender, race, all that is so important. And
when I think a lot of times we so heavily focus on generation right now because it's what's kind of prominent in the workplace. There's lots of different generations in the workplace or entering the workplace. But we forget about things like gender. We forget about other things other than just generation. So it was interesting they lumped these into, these 2 things into one. So I'd be curious about what the generational stat was and what the gender stat was. It came actually from an outside source. I'm looking at it down below there. So I'd be interested to see what they actually each were individually, but I think it's still shocking, like that 40% of people, because everybody can be lumped into one generation. Absolutely. So
and that's a good point you made about like the references to some of the stats. So we're just saying percentages, and it's like in a podcast, it's kind of hard to listen and say, oh, 40% of what,
Right.
So in this report, obviously very extensive, they have all the cited stats and sources and where they got the survey data. Some of it came just from their website, some of it came from outside research. So just wanted to point that out.
Yeah.
What else from this section?
I thought it was interesting. They said companies in top tier for racially and culturally diverse executive teams were 33% more likely to experience above average profitability than companies in the bottom tier.
Wow. That seems like a hard research project to figure that out. So you'd have to almost like analyze
profitability, analyze what diversity their executive team was, and then compare those who had a less diverse executive team to their profitability to ones that were more. And it just goes back to the diversifying your workplace. It's going to bring more ideas and more.
That's what I would think.
Yeah, more openness to different viewpoints. So.
That's
33% profitability, guys.
That's a
there you go.
striking task. Yeah, I love that stat.
Yeah.
So there you go. Bring more racially diverse, culturally diverse, different genders into the executive team. I think that's only going to benefit you.
And don't make them feel ignored.
Yeah, exactly. Did you highlight anything else from that section?
Oh, I had this one. This was so interesting because I am of this generation. I love millennial stuff. I'm on the upper. Yeah.
What's the 34? Yeah, I'm in it.
Yeah. So when we talk about millennials, it's 18 to 34 ages. So they're saying 20% of millennials identify as LGBTQ.
Mind blown.
20%.
I never would thought that.
And that's those that identify as that. So there's probably still a good portion of people that just are maybe don't quite identify as that yet, but just don't necessarily fit into the norm of, male, female gender. Mm-hmm. So I think that that's a huge amount of people that probably feel misunderstood and probably don't feel heard. And it's just interesting. It says it's a notable increase from 12% of Gen Xers. Those are ages 35 to 53. And only 7% of baby boomers identify as LGBTQ, which is ages 52 to 71. So
I don't even know
it's only going to keep increasing.
Yeah.
So
incredible.
Yeah.
It's nice that people are talking about it more. So that maybe they're more comfortable identifying within that group. Whereas before, not so comfortable because it was a very taboo subject. Now it's so nice that people are talking about it. Employers are allowing people to talk about it. It's I have a feeling that number is going to rise.
Yes, I do too. Yeah.
Oh, interesting stat. Yeah. Okay, so let's end. They have a section on marketplace dynamics. And this is really talking about the movement just based on developments in technology, the business climate, and just the way people employers are hiring. So they had a research team at Glassdoor investigated different areas, and I highlighted a few things that were really interesting to me. So they said more than 70% of job applications are to jobs in the same metro area, while 28.5% of job applications are to a new metro area. So 28.5% are willing to move, whereas most people are just applying in the same metro area. What do you attribute that to? The 28.5 seems actually like a high number to me.
See, to me, it doesn't.
Yeah, so you're more likely to move.
I think it depends on your industry, right? Like Portland has been experiencing this huge tech boom, and so I've seen a lot of applicants come in and come out of Portland. But I think it's worth it for me to say, because I see this all the time when I'm looking at resumes. When I see somebody that's applied from out of state, I wonder why they're applying. So it's helpful to kind of note like why you're looking to relocate, because otherwise I think that you've just applied for it just to apply for something, or you might, you know what I mean? Especially depending on the job. If it's an entry level position and you've applied from Midwest somewhere and it's here in Portland, I'm curious as to why. So for applicants out there, if you are looking for jobs in other cities, other states, other countries, wherever, please note like why you're looking to like move, because otherwise it's just super confusing to me. So
that's a good point.
Looking to relocate because my family is in this state, or looking to relocate to this area. It's just something, because otherwise I don't know why you're applying. Hope your recruiter's out.
There's another stat that was so bizarre to me. It says and this may be a little self-serving on Glassdoor's part.
I think it's a little bit self-serving, but it's okay.
I'll say it anyways, because they provided some good value here, so we'll give them some love. It says having a 1-star higher overall rating on Glassdoor attracts talent to a company in a new metro area at about 6 times the rate of paying a $10,000 per year higher salary. So the way I read that, it's kind of a confusing stat, but the way I read it is if you have a higher rating on average on Glassdoor, you're more likely to attract somebody into a new metro area than just throwing money at them.
Yeah.
Is that how you read that?
Yeah, I did too. And I think the reason is that sometimes if you're just throwing money at a situation and it's a bad environment, like people can sense that, right? Like if you have horrible reviews from people all over your Glassdoor page, but you're willing to pay a really high salary, like it's pretty telling. Like I can kind of figure out what you're doing. But if you have some, like really good reviews, you have some like neutral reviews, but it's kind of mixed, but you have a better rating, let's say, than your competitor.
Yeah,
you're probably going to have some sort of an edge, than the other person that might be looking at a job. So,
okay, so give me your parting thoughts on this report and just the overall world of HR recruiting in 2019. Like, what would you say?
It's a big question.
It's a huge question, but I think like if there's a big trend that kind of sticks out to you, just in your experience or something you read from this, what do you think?
Yeah, I think it was an interesting report. If you guys haven't checked it out, we'll put the link in here for you to take a look at it. I thought it was an interesting report, had some good data points in there, especially for those out there who know that they're going to be recruiting quite a bit this year. But I would say, transparency and making sure your employer brand is out there, because that's still what people are looking for, and making sure you're just true to who you are. And
let me take it one step further. So I love that. Because I think attracting those people through the employer brand is really important. But I think the second phase of that is the candidate experience. And they did talk about that in here. Just from what I know. And
we could do a whole nother podcast on
seriously.
Candidate experience.
In fact, we
should actually.
Probably should.
Let's do that.
I'll
book that after. Don't worry, guys.
We will. It's coming. This is phase one here. So I agree. I think those are good points.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, Paige, thanks for joining the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
This was a lot of fun, and we'll have you back soon.
Thank you.